Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast of Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, 5 moments of grace and peace, where you define what we're talking about. We talk about faith. Good morning, Shannon.
Good morning, Leslie.
I'm so glad to be with you again today.
It's great to be with you and any people who are listening or watching.
That's so wonderful. And I love that you organized our 2 episodes that we're going to record with each other to kind of like a 2-parter.
Yeah.
You're so organized.
Today's part 2.
I love it. So let's review what we talked about last week a little bit.
Sure.
If you haven't listened to it, go back, check it out. It's always there for you, infinitum, if you need it. But just like a quick review.
So we were talking some about an older book I actually got back in the 80s, The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. Mm-hmm. And this was a kind of an entry point because I've started the Thursday Connections on Instagram Live.
The first one was so good.
Thank you. So you can go back and watch that if you have Instagram. Follow Round Hill Media, and you can listen to it. It's recorded.
It's recorded.
So,
it's
and
there.
Each one will be, so you can always go back.
Yeah. I will say there was something very special about being with you live, though.
Thank you.
You know, there's something really cool about on demand, about catching content when you can.
Yeah.
And I love that, but I like the live thing too.
Well, it was just a little snippet, right, of connection with God, self, and others. And so this 2-part series on the podcast is a broader discussion of some of the spiritual disciplines. Mm-hmm. And we talked last week about how discipline can sometimes be a bad word. It feels like a bad word based if you're thinking about childhood.
Yes.
But disciplines are really practices that will help us grow spiritually, because that's what we all want. We want to grow. So last week we talked about, according to Richard Foster, the inner disciplines, which were meditation, listening, stopping and listening, prayer, a more active interaction with God. And Foster says, actually, in many of the other desert mothers and fathers and mystics have said that's really the way that you transform in your relationship with God, is through prayer.
That's through prayer.
Fasting, withholding from food or other kinds of things to increase spiritual awareness. Study either of the scriptures or other spiritual religious texts. And then I added in a regular practice of appreciation and gratitude, which shifts it opens our hearts in a different way too.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of, what do you appreciate about yourself and what are you grateful for in other people?
Sure.
And then a regular practice of self-compassion, which we in our culture are not really good at, particularly Protestantism. I'd say all of Christianity, where you forgive yourself as a human being, a recognition that we're all humans, that we all fail, and then we can all do better. And then forgiving ourselves, receiving forgiveness, and then repairing if we need to, and then kind of going on.
Yeah. Listeners of the podcast will recognize, obviously, the topic of self-compassion. We talk about it. We had a whole series on it here. And the real takeaway for me from those conversations is really, everything you said, plus how we speak to ourselves, how we treat ourselves, really can then inform how we treat and speak to others.
So true. That inner voice is sometimes the biggest critic.
Yeah.
We bash ourselves with that all the time.
Daily.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really stuff that we heard from childhood, probably just either internally or externally from a teacher, parent, whoever. And we've just continued on that ourselves. We've taken up the bat ourselves and continued doing it. So yes.
Yeah.
Time to rework that. Way past that.
I like it.
So today we're talking about the outward disciplines, according to Foster. And I'm going to just read quickly the list of them, but I'm going to just focus on 2 of them.
Okay.
So simplicity, solitude versus loneliness.
Right.
Submission, which again can be a very dirty word. And service. Which we're more comfortable with. Right. And then the corporate disciplines, confession, worship, guidance, and celebration. So I thought I would talk about, first of all, Morton Kelsey, who is an Episcopal priest who died back in 2001. He was born in 1917, but he's really known as a great theologian and deeply spiritual man. He was a professor at the University of Notre Dame and the first Western Christian theologian to attempt to make some inroad into the field of meditation. So
very cool.
This is what he said. What we do with our lives outwardly, how well we care for others, is as much a part of meditation as what we do in the quietness and turning inward. In fact, Christian meditation that does not make a difference in the quality of one's outer life is short-sighted, short-circuited. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading. I don't have my reading glasses. It may flare for a while, but unless it results in finding richer and more loving relationships with other human beings, or in changing conditions in the world that cause human suffering, the chances are that an individual's prayer activity will fizzle out.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was profound. So we begin with that whole thought of simplicity. So simplicity, as Foster describes it, is an inner reality that results in an outward lifestyle. So, you know the Shaker hymn, "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free."
Classic.
Right?
Yeah.
Easy to sing it, but harder to put into practice, particularly in this area of the country and in the United States.
Oh, in this country.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In
Where
the
it's
Western
an accumulation
world.
more.
Right.
Like everything that you see is like, oh, that'll make me feel better, or, oh, I need that. Well, the question is, in this discipline, do we really need it?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So one of the things, so there were several aspects to this in terms of, in addition to what we have and what we don't have physically, even focusing on our language. Having simple and honest language is one of the pieces, which I really loved. He also talked about the lust for status and position is gone because we no longer need status and position, that we cease from showy extravagance, and not because we can't afford something, but on principle. We become more focused on contentment, as you and I were just talking about. And our goods become available to others. I remember back when I was kind of going through an austerity phase in my earlier, I was really focusing, actually, when I first read this book in the 1980s.
Yeah.
I was involved with a Presbyterian church down in North Carolina. And we were really kind of working through some of these things. And I thought, what would it mean for me to give away some of the things that were most important to me? How attached was I to stuff?
Right, right.
And so I gave away my most favorite nightgown. I gave away some needlepoint stuff that I had. And I felt what it was like to give it away.
Okay.
And it hurt for a little bit, but then there was such a freedom in doing it. You know, we're into the country's into the craze of, getting rid of stuff. There's that thing, that cleansing out, but to do it for spiritual reasons is a whole different thing.
Right.
Have you ever experienced anything about what it's felt like to give away stuff?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
What was it? Tell us what it's like.
Well, so there's a lot of generational items in my family that I was the only one that kept saying yes to them.
Yes.
So I ended up with like 3 houses worth of stuff in my house. So it's been like a decade of releasing the guilt of getting rid of some of these things that are not, I don't necessarily like, but I felt like I had to keep. Some of them I genuinely do love and will keep forever.
Yeah.
But there was some stuff I sort of need, I needed at the time because I couldn't afford furniture when I was younger, but also just sort of kept because I felt like I had to.
And it's not you.
Right.
That is so key about how extra things can be actually a burden to us.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In terms of just the stuff. We've talked in here. My mother recently died, and there's more stuff that I got. And even as my sisters and I went through the things, she had already downsized from her house to a 2-bedroom apartment.
Right.
But feeling like going in, and it was really interesting to watch all of our needs to feel we needed to connect to her. So we got stuff, and then I came home with it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I've got this stuff and I can't let it go.
Right.
Because it has meaning to it.
Yeah. But I feel like there's a level for that, right? There's some things have a beautiful connection and memory and meaning, and there's something wonderful in that. And then there's just sort of stuff.
Right.
You know, in our house we use some stronger language for that.
Well, and I have 4 boxes of that stuff that haven't even been opened.
Right.
Down in the basement.
Yeah, when it just doesn't, when nothing has a place to put it.
Right.
You know, when you have so much stuff that there isn't a place for it, and you haven't used it in for who knows how long.
So that's a really good point for people who are looking at downsizing their homes and giving their stuff to their kids. Let's just make a point right now just to say, don't feel bad if your kids don't want it.
Right. It's okay. They still love you.
Meaning isn't always attached to stuff. And stuff means stuff to different people.
Yes. I will say, I don't think my mother would be too mad at me for outing her for this. She really wanted me to enjoy having collections as a younger person.
Yes.
Which seemed fun. I wasn't particularly into them very much. And so now I have this like big envelope of postcards from my postcard collection, of which I have 0 attachment, but I also feel really bad. So I was actually moved my office within our house over the past couple of weeks. And so I kept looking at this like envelope of postcards. Like, what am I going to do?
And what'd you decide?
It's still in the bookcase.
Go, Leslie, go.
Well, there's like a what are those called? A pin collection?
Yeah.
That one at least has a little more, you know.
So what would it take for you to let go of the postcards?
I just need to throw them away. I see, here's where I get caught. I get caught because then I feel like I'm adding to landfills. I'm like, well, how do I properly dispose of this without it being a climate crisis? And I work it up a little high in my head.
Okay. I think that could be like a
just let it go. Just let it go.
Why don't you burn them in the fireplace? Because then you're contributing to.
Yeah, I think there's like some chemicals in the ink or something. There's like some plastic.
Okay.
Let's not burn plastic.
I think we're in a little bit of a rut here.
I think we're stuck. I think we got stuck on the postcards, which is to say, simplicity can be a challenge when we are conditioned otherwise.
Yes. Well, here's one thing Foster says. Foster says that because of human lack of a divine center, our need for security has led us to an insane attachment to things.
Yeah, sure.
And I would say even money. This I've had to really examine the deep-seated fear of, oh my God, I'm not going to be taken care of, which is familial as well as theological.
Sure.
So if I felt as a kid that, oh my God, I've got to get stuff to be okay, to make sure I have what I need around me, versus that God is taking care of me.
Right.
I'm doing the things that I need to do in order for those things to happen. But I am in the care of God.
Yeah.
So I really believe that lack of divine center really drives people to accumulate more.
Yeah. I think it's also specifically, like we were saying, this country and this culture, but then this particular part of this country where just the numbers required to live here feel like monopoly money.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
Having, grown up in the South in the 80s, this is just different numbers.
It's insane.
It's just, it feels silly.
And during the pandemic, those who were in the upper, the 1%, quadrupled their money.
Right.
And so it's like, it's not even, I don't even know what it would mean to be in conversation with someone that had $1 trillion or billions and billions of dollars. I don't know what that would mean. Hopefully they're still centered, because I think it would be really difficult to have so much and to still be authentic and be, I don't know. That's something I don't know.
Yeah. It's almost its own burden unto itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that.
One of the things that we did when I was here before at Round Hill, and I did it in my subsequent church, was I took several groups of people, 2 from here and 2 from Wilton, to Nicaragua, to rural Nicaragua. We went down for a week. And we worked alongside of Masons and family members in rural communities to build a house.
Oh, beautiful.
And through Bridges to Community, it's a great organization that's out of Ossining, New York. But it's a wonderful organization in that it supports local people and businesses to thrive there.
Okay.
So it's not white people coming in and doing for them, but it's really encouraging local business. But anyway, we lived on rice and beans and slept on cots with mosquito netting, just to allow people here, particularly young people in high school, a chance to see life differently outside of privileged area. And when I came back from one of the experiences in Wilton, I encouraged people to consider, it was during Lent, to consider a practice of seeing what it would be like to live food-wise on $7 a day, which is the amount of money for SNAP, which is food stamps. Yeah. And seeing what that was like. Right. Including, so my daughter and I did it. And first it was, okay, so if we did that for a week, we'd each have $35. No, 7 times 7 would be 49. Yeah. So we went and we bought a big thing of rice and a big thing of beans, but then there really wasn't a lot of money for fresh vegetables or fruit, which are costly.
So expensive.
Right? Unless you're farming them yourself or, gardening. Right. So it brought, again, a different kind of a discipline of what does it look like to be free from having so much, of having the choice of 50 things for dinner or even more than that. And it just it brought up some things for us to be aware of, because that's what all of these disciplines are about, awareness.
Well, and I had my first experience of real gardening last summer. Not that cheap.
Not that cheap. Doesn't necessarily produce a lot for ongoing. And it's only seasonal. Yeah. Right?
Right. And so, and you can stretch it and, if you get a ton of stuff, stretch it. But it's not the that's free produce.
Right.
That's
right. And it takes time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it speaks to the challenge of that. I was thinking about how our conversation applies, because we are actually approaching, if you can believe it, we're approaching Lent.
That's true.
Again.
First week in March.
First week in March is Ash Wednesday. And it's such an interesting thing to sort of think about, are there thoughts and lessons we can apply as we approach that time? Now's kind of the time to think. Yeah. Right?
Well, the scriptures are full of examples of Jesus confronting the economic structures of his day. Yeah. And even in the Old Testament, the year of Jubilee, which every 7 years, basically the tables were cleared and people who owed were released from their debts. Oh, wow. And so it was kind of an evening of the decks, if you would. But Jesus talked about the poor and raise the level of the poor constantly, and how everything that we are given is from God, that we're stewards of God's earth. Right. So there's a great responsibility in that. For sure. The other thing that I loved that Foster talks about is that, buying things for usefulness rather than status, and rejecting those things which produce an addiction in you, giving things away, refusing fads of the day used to save time. Oh my gosh. With all of the iWatches and this thing drives me nuts, because it's constantly telling me if I have a text or not. Yeah. And so I put it away for a year. And it was given as a gift to me by my husband. And it's where's the Apple Watch? And I'm like, but I don't like being constantly notified about things.
I can understand that.
I don't want that. But I'm not everybody. And the avoid buy now, pay later. Being in debt, right? Credit card debt. Right. And to use plain, honest speech. So those were the things with simplicity.
One thing that I think is interesting is the focus that has been developing over the past couple of years over fast fashion.
Say more.
So there's, the ability of manufacturing in our world, I will say, because let's be honest, it's not happening actually in our country, to create clothing at such a cheap price point means that we have basically disposable clothing. that is very inexpensive and will last like maybe a season or two. And I think that speaks to exactly this idea of simplification of buying for usefulness, excuse me. And that it is, and it's way, 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 way better for our environment and our climate and our world to not be engaging with this kind of, the trends.
Right. Which oftentimes are using sweatshops probably.
Right.
And abusing workers.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a mixed bag, right? Because you want to be able to employ people, but you want it done in humane situations and environments.
Right. And I feel like a lot of different industries have kind of go through their own reckoning. Like I feel like the coffee industry went through this maybe 10, 15 years ago, where all the coffee got way more expensive because they were actually paying their workers a fair wage. And lo and behold, we're all very happy to pay it.
Lo and behold.
Just
look at the line at Starbucks.
Oh my gosh.
Or any coffee shop.
Or any coffee. Yeah. I mean, the coffee we buy at our house is like $15, $20 a bag or something.
Wow. From
this place with the thing. But it's, it's part of buying, knowing what you're buying and knowing, because we have the ability to spend that much, voting, shall we say, with our money for our values, for things that feel important. Fashion being part
interesting.
Of that. Yeah.
All right, let's switch to the second one that we're going to solitude. Now, that has been this is an interesting word, particularly in light of COVID and what we've been through over the last few years, because so many people were isolated. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being alone, but not lonely.
Right.
So how to use that? So, there were a whole bunch of examples in the scripture of Jesus started his ministry with 40 days in the wilderness, right? To be alone. Now, that's when he was supposedly tempted. And, so solitude can bring up things on a deeper level.
Right.
But if we want to be with others in a meaningful way, we must take time for solitude, and we must seek the fellowship and accountability of others if we want our alone time to be safe. So that's interesting too, because we know that there's been a lot of mental health issues that come with, people who are at risk of being alone, depression.
Right.
So the need for the combination of solitude and connected time with others, meaningful connection with others, must be together. And it keeps people accountable. Like somebody to say, that's not, you're not thinking right.
Right.
All right. So that's not what we're talking. We're really needing both together. So, so what does it mean, and how does one have solitude with silence? So without silence, there is no solitude. But it's not just silence. It's developing a listening heart to God, kind of an inner guidance. And that's what creates an inner sense of silence, the ability to still our minds. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes after a very busy day, I have to do crossword puzzles to get my mind just focused on one thing and then just start to kind of walk back a little bit. We talked some about that before the podcast started, of just, after, it really, bless you, it takes a lot to kind of silence our minds, doesn't it? So the ability to still our minds can start, again, this is a practice. Right. So that's where meditation can come in. I remember having gone to Jesuit retreat centers for anywhere from 3 to 7 days, like 3 times a year, to quiet my mind and to clear things out and just be still. Right. And I remember every single time, the first 24 hours, I was climbing the walls to deprogram from all of the stuff.
Right.
But by the end of that time, whether it was the 3 days or the 7 days, I was in a totally different place. Heart open, cleared, ready to go back into society. So I would not have been I would not choose the monastic life. But I know that I need to take time away. I mean, it may be, for some of us, that may be impossible, right? Particularly if you have young kids. And if you're a single parent, impossible to do.
Right.
But perhaps the way I've heard some people do it, and you'll know sooner than later, is just waking up an hour earlier to have solitude and time alone, just to kind of be without, maybe it's just looking out the window and just letting your mind go and just be still. And then coming back in and maybe journaling about it.
Sure.
To see what that is. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I'm wondering, because I feel like so much of the modern experience is, you talk about solitude and then you talk about deep connection. And I feel like modern culture kind of lives in the middle, in this kind of gray. We're not really connecting, but we're not really alone necessarily, because we're always like kind of connected ish.
Yeah.
Through social media, through whatever, through like vague conversations.
It's not really right.
So we're not really getting deep on either level.
Right.
And so I think maybe that's where that sort of sticking point or challenge arises, because if we're missing deep connection, solitude can feel really intimidating.
It can be very intimidating. And the whole concept of, have you ever heard of Dark Night of the Soul?
No, what's that?
So St. John of the Cross, Desert Father, a long time ago, coined the phrase the dark night of the soul. And maybe it's the fear of going into that deep abyss.
Sure.
It's not depression. It's just a time when there's a person may feel totally disconnected from everything. And what he put, the lens through which he sees or saw that time, because he's no longer living, of course, is that this was one of the most important spiritual parts of a journey that any person can have, and that we all have them at some point. And many people do a lot to keep from going into that, whether it's addictive kinds of behaviors or keeping social media on or TV or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is a time to draw close to the divine center. So it might be you've lost someone you love in your life, or you've lost what you feel like is your sense of purpose. And rather than having that be a hopeless time, to just kind of rest in that, knowing that it won't last forever. And that's where maybe a spiritual director, a pastor, a spiritual friend can help you, even a coach can help say, this is just a phase. But so many people have gone through that and come out the other side and said, oh my goodness, I have renewed sense of purpose.
Yeah.
So for instance, when I went through my divorce, and I just thought, I don't know what, I thought this was what I was supposed to do. I don't know. And I just kind of sat back and just stopped and just, or when the other thing too was when my daughter was ill for a couple of years. I literally sat on my couch while she was upstairs sleeping this was like for almost a 2-year period. Wow. And when I wasn't at work, when she wasn't at her father's, and I just sat and I just was still.
Yeah.
Just knowing I don't know what's next. I don't know when I'm going. I was working as a news reporter at that time, only filling in. And that's when I kind of revisioned a call for ministry. So it was just a time that had a lot of questions in it. For some, it's darker than others.
Right.
But that can come in solitude. And so some people may be afraid of that, but I think what many of the great spiritual guides of our past and our current would say is it's a normal part of going through things, that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's difficult, and you don't need to explain it away to people, but just say, this is where I am. Yeah. And you'll come out the other side.
There's a huge vulnerability in that.
Huge.
Yeah.
Because there's the thing of, what if it doesn't end?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Then, what do you do with that? And everybody wants people to be up and happy and, concerned that it may be more of a clinical thing.
Sure.
So that's why you'd want to check in with people and just say, this is where I am, make sure that chemically you're okay inside. That's what a doctor could help you with. But spiritually, some of the great, great, great people of faith have gone through dark nights of the soul and then come out with a different sense of vision. And
so for people who are maybe interested in dipping their toe in, shall we say. You mentioned a couple ideas of waking up early. We talk a lot here about being in nature. What are some other sort of practical ways people can enter into a time of solitude?
So what I've heard from people and what's been helpful is to set aside a little place in your house or in your apartment as a little sanctuary. It might have some of your favorite items that make you think, draw you into a different space, a candle perhaps. I had like a little picture of my grandmother, who was an important spiritual guide in my life, and just different things as a place to go, as a place set apart. So that might be one. Another thing is getting up early, journaling can help with solitude, because you know that for that period of time, it's just you and the pen and the paper, and it can help you go deeper. And if you can, if you are able in your situation in life to be able to get away for a day or two, do that. There are monasteries around, even in this area, but there are always retreat centers that are open to having people of different faith backgrounds come. And there's a beautiful place. I would go to the place over in Warnersville, Pennsylvania. I was out in the farmlands in Pennsylvania, but there's one on the Hudson River, Holy Cross Monastery. You can go, and that's an Episcopal one. The one I went to is Jesuit. There are places there's a place in Madison where you can go for silent retreat. And they offer spiritual directors there, as well as you can just go and be silent on your own. So that might be a time to kind of reorient and refocus on your goals for the coming year, or just to be quiet and just to be still. And to simplify your speech, to think about, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me?
Yeah.
And does this need ever to be said? So sometimes things are just not necessary. And we have a funny saying, like, you're filling the space with words. It doesn't need with sound. You don't need to say anything right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
We joke about that in my house, just kind of like when somebody's like, blah, 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 I'm like, that doesn't need to be said. In the kindest of ways.
Of course. It's funny because I interpreted that as saying more directly what you mean.
Well, that's true too.
It's kind of how I just, from the South, we like to pack in that
too.
Sentence with all the extra.
I know. And then the little zing can kind of come in that.
Yeah, I'm not good at the art of the zing, but I'm good at I've been starting this practice now where I write an email and then I delete about half the words. Because I'm like, it'll take them 14 hours to read what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
It makes
An
no
efficiency
sense
of
at
words. An efficiency of words.
Efficiency of words.
Yeah. So I think I appreciate when people just kind of tell me what they're thinking without me having to guess. Right. And then also I'm honest about making sure that I'm owning whatever I'm saying and not putting on them. So that's another thing too.
Yeah.
But yeah, simplicity of words, definitely. And then there's the flip side of that, which is if you're not speaking up when you should speak up, right? Yeah. And that's, I grew up in the South with an authoritarian father who, children were seen, not spoken, didn't speak.
Yeah.
But they were seen and not heard.
Yes.
That's the proverb, right?
You got there. You got there.
And yeah, exactly. And so training myself to have a voice.
Right.
Took a lot.
Yeah.
And now at the beginning of that, I spoke too much and then I needed to kind of come back to center.
Sure.
But yeah, to speak up when it's important to speak up. And in our culture, unfortunately, a lot of times that's women.
Right.
We've grown up in a thing of, women need to be polite and but there's great power in being able to say what you mean and not say it mean, as they say in 12-step groups.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. There's you can always be kind.
You can always be kind.
You can always be kind. But I think.
And tone is a thing about it too.
Absolutely.
So simplicity and solitude, the two things today. And the other things that I said, submission. And that's really submitting oneself, or surrendering, maybe is even a better word. I like that one better. Yeah. Surrendering to God's presence in your life, to whatever God wants to do in your life.
Yeah.
And then service, which is always an important thing and so essential in our lives as people of faith.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for sharing these disciplines with us, these practices, these great ideas for living.
And thanks to Richard Foster.
And thanks to Richard Foster for guiding us along the way.
Yes.
So we hope you all have such a great week. And Roundhill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Roundhill Community Church. We'll see you back here next week.